Good afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed lunch. I hope you enjoyed this morning's proceedings. We've got an interesting afternoon lined up for you. And you probably don't want to hear from me, so we'll lead straight into our next session with Stuart Calvert, Director of Rail Investment, the Rail Investment Centre of Excellence at Network Rail. So helpful how I read that, but I'll hand over to Stuart. Perhaps he can make sense of what I...
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. I don't know how I got the gig after lunch, but it's one of those things you just have to deal with, isn't it? So let's have a look. Right, we've got the intro. Those of you who don't know, I do know a few people here, so thanks for inviting me to talk to you about reimagining and redefining the UK rail sector and the role of the supply chain. That's the critical thing that I'll really focus on. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Director of the Rail Investment Centre of Excellence, which operates across the whole of Network Rail, looking at our whole investment process from portfolio planning through sponsorship, through delivery, supporting and working with the regions. I'm also the Capital Delivery Director for Wales and Western, so I have a delivery role as well. What I want to talk about is, in reimagining the rail sector, what does that investment mean first off? Why have we got to change and how are we going about change? And of course, crucially, what's the role of the supply chain in that change? Now, I don't think anyone will have missed the recent announcement about the IRP and the Rail Network Enhancement Plan. It was very public knowledge, very big news. And in that, what's that set out? Well, first of all, it has set out an increased pipeline of investment, 96 billion. So it is an increase, but it is on a redefined portfolio. And I'm not going to go into that because I want to focus this afternoon talking about why we're changing and how we're going about changing, the role the supply chain has to do with that. In there, though, what won't have gone amiss is, and I think building on the talk you had earlier today, this is part of the levelling up agenda in terms of where that money's spent. But the details of that, I said, is probably for others to talk about. And I should say, it's not just the enhancements pipeline. We've still got our Control Period 6 Investment Renewals Fund, and we're currently developing CP7 renewals and investment funds. But just a reminder, this isn't new, this has been around for a couple of years, but a reminder of how we go about delivering the works. So we're based in this devolved structure, the 5 regions that many of you will be familiar with. These are almost autonomous. They're not, they're semi-autonomous. We're obviously part of a strong network centre. And those 5 regions are fully responsible for the delivery of everything we do, whether it's running the trains, whether it's managing the investment, working with our stakeholders, totally responsible. So the network function I have as the Director of the Centre of Excellence has no delivery responsibility. It supports and works with those regions. And that's really, really important. Within those 5 regions, we've got the 13 routes, again, which you'll be familiar with. I'm sure many of you will be. Also at the Network Centre, we do have a team, Clive Berrington, I don't know if he's here or if he's been here. I did see his name, Clive Berrington, leading on developing commercial strategies that are network-wide. So there's some aspects of the work we do, signalling, electrification, where we can't think of that as just 5 regions coming up with their independent strategies. So we do have a network function that deals with that and considers those national contractual requirements. And then my Centre of Excellence, we work very much as in a federated model with the 5 regions to set out how do we want to change how we manage investment, what are the standards we want to follow, how do we deal with portfolio planning, how do we work with the department and the Treasury to work out where we want to spend the money, working with them to meet their policy requirements. And it has a PMO function, again, to provide the information on investment. And that's quite important, which I'll come on to in terms of how we're going about change. So why do we need to change? This part of reimagining. Well, being quite brutal and quite frank, as an industry, in a lot of places, we've moved beyond efficient and effective delivery. In some places, costs have risen to an extent it makes it extraordinarily difficult to make a business case. And quite frankly, with the economic climate we're in, we've got to be absolutely on the ball with efficient and effective delivery, and that is the critical thing. So how are we measuring it? And I talked about the Centre of Excellence, and on this slide here, we talk about having critical benchmarks we must meet. And we work very closely with the IPA, the Infrastructure Projects Authority and Treasury, on those benchmarks. So we know certain areas where we need to move the dial in our efficiency in project delivery to make the case for investment in rail. And a good example of that is the pound in the ground. You may have heard of it. If you haven't heard of it, it's a really simple measure of how much of the money that we spend actually goes into productive work in the ground. And we've now set pound in the ground benchmarks across our whole network. And we have another measure which is basically the same rail value measure, which calculates a slightly different way. There's a very simple reason for that. With our signalling projects, data design is a valuable pound, but the IPA method wouldn't count that. So if you see rail value measure, pound in the ground, really important benchmarks that we're trying to achieve. And then there's the usual things, unit rates, unit rate of doing things, miles of track laid, and so on. Demonstrating we achieve those benchmarks and moving towards those benchmarks helps us, working with the department, with the Treasury, to make strong cases. But the other one is about time, the time it takes to do things. I'm going to talk about the SPEED programme. And there's two examples of SPEED projects. I'll come back to Oakhampton shortly, but fundamentally what we wanted to do is how much quicker can we get that beneficial use of investment? It's really simple. You know, the two things we're trying to improve are the return on the investment and the payback time. And that's what we all need to work together on. And that's what SPEED is all about. And whether we use the halving the time, slashing the costs, improving productivity, hitting benchmark, it's all the same thing. It's all about getting a better return on investment and getting it sooner. And there's two examples there. We're working through, we started with 6 projects and we went on. But I want to talk a little bit more about the SPEED principles. It's a nice little graphic there about putting into a few words how we can be far more challenging over what we do. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail on the next slide. But fundamentally, it starts with us as a client being much better at defining the outcome we want to achieve. I think it's one of the biggest challenges for the industry, actually, is being better at understanding what is the outcome we want to achieve, and it's something we're working really hard at. But then when we've got that outcome, working in different models, and I'll talk about a couple of the models that we're developing, working in a different way with suppliers to achieve that outcome whilst getting those better benefits in terms of return on investment and time. We want the teams to be accountable. I said our regions are accountable. We want our project teams and our supplier relationships to be accountable, but to be enabled to challenge, to come up with better answers. And that's all we did with SPEED. We sat down and we took 6 projects initially and said, how could we do this differently? What are the things that we need to do it differently to get a better result? One term we use is diversity of challenge, and this is the thing we found, and it's obvious when we ask the same people the same question, we'll come up with the same answer. So bringing different people in from different backgrounds, from different industries, from different parts of the railway, from different geographies, just to question and challenge. And the amount of success we've had through that diverse challenge in coming up with different answers. I had one just the other day where a survey that had been put together, we managed to cut 25% of the cost by challenging it in a different way and thinking slightly differently. So those are the principles of SPEED. And the outcome of SPEED is what we call a minimum viable product, and that's where we want to go. And those 4 quadrants are really important because it gives us a structured way of thinking what we want to do. And I'm always really careful to say, this is not about squeezing margins. It's not about cutting corners. It's not about delivering a worse product. It's not about reducing safety standards. In fact, I would argue if we get this right, we improve all of those. And it starts top right, scope challenge. What have we actually got to build to meet that outcome? Have we actually got to build anything? Could we achieve the outcome? Pretty brave of me in a construction news summit to say, actually, have we got to build anything? The no build, low build, smart build concept is one. Can we achieve the outcome in a different way by either not building anything or doing things differently? So that's the first question. The second question, which is one which we've challenged in the industry for years, is have we actually got the right specifications? Are we putting heavily onerous railway type specs on something that could be built in a different way with highway standards where we haven't got to consider live operational railway and similar? Again, not cutting safety corners, but having the right spec for what we need to do. Have we got the right modular solutions? Could we make more use of modular solutions, off-the-shelf solutions for stations, for platforms, and so on? And we've been doing this for years. We just don't do it enough. And then the third bit, and this is where it really gets quite important and quite interesting for suppliers, is the management challenge. Have we got the right management? And this is where we really want to move the dial, because this is what will change fundamentally that pound in the ground. There is no point in us as a client having a huge management team, engaging a supplier who's got a huge management team, engaging a sub-supplier who's got a huge management team, all second-guessing and all challenging each other. It's waste. And so we need to look at what the management is required across that whole investment life cycle to create the minimum viable management and drive up the pound in the ground and drive up the value. And then with risk, too many of our projects historically, we haven't fully understood what it is we're going to build. So we've got uncertainty or options that we take them through from development into delivery. We need to be really clear on that outcome. To achieve that outcome, we're going to build this and we're going to do that. And as much as possible, we'll have appropriate level of risk so we eliminate uncertainty or options. So what's the role of the supplier in the supply chain? Well, I'm going to start with what's the role of Network Rail in this. And our role is to be a client. Sounds obvious, but in the past, we've tried to be a client, a construction manager, a contractor, sometimes all of them in one job. Now, I'm really, really clear, and it's something as the Centre of Excellence Director and as the Capital Delivery Director and with the other 4 Capital Delivery Directors, we all work very, very strongly together. We're really clear we're a client. And that's a lot of relearning for us in Network Rail, to be clear on what the client is, defining that whole system requirement. Again, not just sticking to the build, what's the system requirement? There's a great example I use of a footbridge that was built, and it's near where I live. And we were replacing a perfectly good footbridge with a footbridge that would have access for all, lifts. So that was the point of it. It was providing access for all. And we did a great job building the footbridge, and 2 years later we commissioned the lifts. So it wasn't a whole system approach. We just said built a bridge and then took forever to get the lifts commissioned. Well, get that payback, it just wasn't good enough because we weren't thinking the system is to provide access for all. The system at Oakhampton is to provide a service for people to get to North Dartmoor. It's not relaying 11 miles of track and all the things like that. That's part of the means to end. So being a really good client means being clear on what the whole system is. Providing that challenge, being more challenging, and something I've agreed with the department for transport. Network Rail's got a really good peer review process on projects, really good. It's one of the best in class, but it's all internal, so we're opening that up. We're opening that up to have independent peer review as well, to encourage and support that diversity of challenge. I then talk about giving access, and that doesn't just mean possession planning or giving access to the track. It's giving access in all senses. Whatever we do, the railway is a complex, difficult environment to work in, and if you're a brilliant contractor in your field, I wouldn't expect you to know all the niceties of all those railway things. So as a client, providing access to make it as easy as possible for suppliers to succeed is our role, not to make it as difficult as possible. But then we have a really important role as a public sector organisation, an extended arm of the department, is providing assurance in every sense, safety assurance, technical assurance, and fundamentally assurance that every pound we spend is really good value for the taxpayer. So those critical roles: define the outcome, give access, and assure what we're providing is really good. So that's our role, which is fundamentally just to make sure we're providing what passengers and freight users want. So the role of suppliers in all of that is to be smart, efficient, effective, use the ingenuity and the skills and the capability. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of people smiling saying, if only we could. And that's why I said in the role of the suppliers, the role of the client is important. We want you to use ingenuity. We want you to use the expertise. We want you to deliver brilliantly. We want to help you do that. And that's going to require a very different relationship. And in there, referencing to Project 13 and Construction Playbook, if you're familiar with it, I'm sure most people here will be, we believe in all those principles as much as possible, where we can use them effectively to help us do that. So I wanted to talk about two models where we're actually making that change now. And I'm deliberately not choosing my Wales and Western model because that would sound a bit too easy for me to do. So I'm going to talk about what's happening in Eastern and then what's happening in Southern. Now, fundamentally, we're all doing the same thing, which is to achieve everything I've just said, having a different supplier relationship. And my friend, Mr. Cairns, Rob Cairns, has been driving the ACE project, the Agile Client Eastern project, and he's well on with that. And what he's doing there is he's changing the relationship, having a leaner, thinner client to do all the stuff I just said, and then having a different relationship, a longer-term relationship with suppliers in a different model, and as much as possible, getting to the tier twos. Now, that's an interesting discussion for people here, that we want to get close to really good tier twos where they directly deliver what's required. That doesn't mean there isn't a role for tier ones. Of course, that doesn't mean that. But we want to get closer to tier twos because we know that's where a lot of the core capability and skills sit. So that's what the Eastern Agile Client ACE model is all about, having that different model with suppliers, working together, closer to tier twos, engaging with tier ones, and having a lean client. And it's fundamentally driven by those speed principles. And then on Southern, let's try and move that on. This is a little bit behind where Eastern are. It's in development at the moment. You can see some timescales there. They're currently defining their strategy and getting approval for it. And it's an enterprise model. Capable owner, another term for the client being a client. So the role of the Southern team is to be that capable client and create enterprise models, selecting a group of suppliers to work together, to work with the Southern executive on their business plan, be involved really early in the development of business plan and delivery of what's required, working as an enterprise to work out from that group of enterprise suppliers who will best deliver which jobs. So those are two models, and say Wales and Western, we have another model that's very, very similar, and North West and Central and Scotland are working through their proposals as well. Fundamentally, they're all based on the same principles. We want the supply chain working much closer with us being a genuine real client, and you being much closer to the development of our business cases as well as the delivery of the projects. And it's all about driving that better value. Now, those of you say, wow, yeah, we've heard this all before. This is my scarily, this is my 40th year in the industry, and we run through these things from time to time, and people say, yeah, just a fad, speed will go, Calvert will move on, something else will happen. This is real, and it's delivering, because in the week that the IRP and RNet were announced, there was only one railway story that did knock it off the top drawer. Well, it certainly did in the south. It might not have done in the north so much. And that was reopening the Oakhampton line. And why was this so important? It was so important because we delivered a railway service actually 8 months and 1 day after the financial authority was granted. And it wasn't just reopening a branch line that existed. It was relaying virtually all the track, 11 miles of track, 29,000 tonnes of ballast, 24,000 sleepers, a new GSMR radio network, revitalising the station, building a car park, tons of vegetation, tons of drainage work. And it was done in 8 months and 1 day from financial authority. And it used all those speed principles, because we started off by saying, what we actually got to do, we just need to get a service from Exeter to Oakhampton. That's what we need to do. We fundamentally changed the amount of track we were going to renew, because we said, well, if we want to get a service, what have we got to have? We've got to have a timetable that works. How do we get a timetable that works? It's got to be hourly. We've got to get that right. To get hourly, we've got to have these speeds. Originally, we were going to relay a lot more track, but to get the timetable, actually, the track we had to relay, we relayed it to a standard that we could get a speed that meant the stuff we didn't have to relay, we didn't have to change the speed, and we still got the service. So that is one example of how those speed challenge ideas were focused purely on service delivery. We saved 18 months compared to conventional delivery, well over £10 million. Well over £10 million against an original budget, and I think we could do more. I think if we were starting Oakhampton Day with what we learned, we could have achieved more. But what was vital about Oakhampton, what was brilliant about Oakhampton, was it was just about delivering that service, and the people and the communities that we've now opened up to do that have been focused. We've not dwelled on the engineering, we've dwelled on that whole system approach and doing it differently, working with our suppliers in a different way and challenging mindset. So, look, it's real. We've got different models that we're bringing in. It will take time for us to get across the board, but this is a genuine, essential need to reimagine how we deliver investment in the rail industry. And I think with that, I'm happy to take some questions.
Well, thank you very much, Stuart.
Thank you.
We do have a microphone in the room, and we also have Slido. Those of you who are here this morning will be well aware of that. I don't know if there's anybody who would like to put a question from the floor straight away, or shall I? Anyone? We have a question down here.
The Oakhampton project is very good news, but when is the line going to go on to Plymouth? I thought the original idea was to provide an alternative route so that when the coastal line was flooded, people could still get to Cornwall.
That wasn't the idea of this project. That is an idea of some people, I'm sure, as you well know and as I know. But fundamentally, this was about providing service to Oakhampton, but the important bit on the question you've asked is by demonstrating how we've worked very differently. I didn't even dwell on this bit, but it's really important. We work very, very differently with Devon County Council, for a start, who've been passionate campaigners, worked very, very closely with them, worked extraordinarily closely with GWR. You know, I didn't mention Great British Railways, but the future role of track and train coming much closer together. GWR and Network Rail have been seamless in the delivery of Oakhampton. We've worked very closely with stakeholder groups, local stakeholder groups, individuals, other campaign groups. And what it's demonstrated and why it's important to other aspirations, and whether it's getting from Plymouth to Tavistock or then joining Tavistock to Oakhampton, that's for others to make policy and other decisions. But what it's demonstrated is if we do that, we can deliver things that make the case economically and demonstrate that we're safe, trusted deliverers so that we can open up the other schemes. And whether it's Northumberland Line in the north or Waterside Line in the south or a Tavistock or whatever, that's why it's important. So it has met the outcome. The outcome of this was to open up services to Oakhampton. But yeah, great question. And it, you know, look, I mean, Grant Shapps came to the opening, and you can tell it wasn't just political delight. He was genuinely delighted and amazed with what had been achieved. And so doing that is great for all of us, and it shows what we can do if we work together in that way.
And is the decision-making there on that particular project illustrative of what you're talking about minimum viable product?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, we rightly went through the ringer with the Department and Treasury, rightly. Now, what we've got to do, all of us, is we've got to put ourselves through the ringer so that when we go through the ringer there, we've actually already done it. And so absolutely that. And you know, we challenge ourselves. That project as an example, I think it was about 18 months ago, was the first discussion I had with GWR. And we agreed we're going to do this really differently. Now, we actually went through some hoops where we got dragged back into the process, you know, and said, no, that's, you know, we're doing this differently, and we had to keep pushing and keep challenging, but we did rightfully go through the ringer to make sure we were demonstrating a minimum viable product. But we could do more, and we've got to do that together. That's what ACE and the Southern Enterprise Model and what I'm doing in Wales and Western, which is called Spirit, by the way, but never mind. But that's why those things are so important, because it's us, it's unlocking the potential together to get to a minimum viable product.
Is that notion of minimum viable product, is that something that's perhaps peculiar to infrastructure projects where you can have that sort of iterative approach to improvement, which perhaps isn't applicable to other kinds of construction?
I don't know. I don't think so, because fundamentally a minimum viable product might involve no infrastructure. You know, it could be a pure, depends what you call infrastructure, what you call digital infrastructure. It could be a pure data-driven solution, or a pure technology-driven solution, or a pure operating solution. You know, so I don't think it is unique to infrastructure. I think infrastructure helps because, you know, we tend to think in big chunks of stuff and big spend on concrete. And you know, in there, I haven't explicitly mentioned it, but, you know, there's the carbon side of this as well, because a minimum viable product will be carbon more efficient. That's one of the measures we're going to be measuring on every job as well going forward.
You also mentioned the peer review process and how you were trying to change that. Could you say a little bit more about that? I'm not sure I grasped it.
Yeah, so, and I know there's at least one person in the room who I'm looking at in the corner who would have been part of that in the past. Network Rail had evolved a very good peer review process where completely independent teams to projects at different stages of the project would go in and challenge and question against you know, things I mentioned, assurance and so on. How viable was the project to be delivered? Was it on track? You know, and cast that critical, hopefully supportive eye across the team. Very, very effective. But only had one minor flaw, in my opinion, which was it was other people within Network Rail. And you do get into that mindset that, oh, actually, I mean, people didn't select their own teams, but, oh, it's such and such, and he's my mate, and she's my friend, and I've worked with them on a different project. So the risk is you do get into a groupthink. Now, it is a good process. It still happens. What I was keen to do with the Centre of Excellence is expand that, and actually TfL have a very good system, IPAG system, where they have independent review. I wanted to expand it that we can bring other people in who are not in Network Rail and not even in the rail industry who would add value. You know, if I got a project which has got a major amount of tunnelling work, to be honest, I want Andy Mitchell doing a peer review or someone like that who's, you know, world renowned in the tunnelling work. You know, you want those people from a different world, you know, so that's what it's about. And we do use the term diversity challenge because in all senses of that diverse challenge, we know we get better answers.
Well, on that note, that positive note, Stuart, thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you.
And your insights. So.
Thank you very much.